Welcome back. You can see the grass is greening up a bit from some warmer weather we've been seeing. Compost pile sitting right around, what, 120? Sitting about 120. We got a bunch of moisture in here. I just pulled this tarp off the last 2 days, let a bunch of rain come in, and it really picked those temperatures up there. So let's head back on in the greenhouse because it's only about 25 degrees out here or something. It's darn cold outside right now. Whew. It is nice in here. I've got my wood stove going just for my own comfort. And we are in some seriously tricky times. This is always the trickiest time of the year for me because getting all of these plants going for our farmers market and having all of this money and time invested into these crops. We've got our aquaponics running down here, so it's a little loud, but we've got all this time and money invested into all these crops and all of this money that we can potentially profit from. So what makes this time so tricky, which is the springtime? The springtime is the hardest time to be growing in a greenhouse because you have such highs and such lows, and it's very unpredictable. We're getting hot temperatures, 70-degree day, a random 70-degree day, abnormal warm temps, and then we're still seeing down in the teens and snow and ice and stuff like that. So we're heating, we're cooling all in the same day and dealing with this weeks at a time, trying to be successful and get everything started, and we could have hundreds, if not thousands of dollars worth of loss if we're not prepared to protect all these plants and continue heating this greenhouse at the same time as we're cooling it. Now, if that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. I want to run through this tricky time and how we're growing in the tricky times. So growing in a greenhouse is not always easy. You can have extreme highs and extreme lows, and if you're not prepared for that, you might not be successful, or you might be set back a couple weeks to a month on starts or plants that you've got in the ground, either or. So I'm going to start with what we're doing right now to keep this greenhouse cool. Although we haven't seen the sun for about a week now, and we've been dealing with rain and snow and ice and stuff like that, just nasty winter weather. So when we have those abnormally warm days, we already have our shade cloth on at least half of this greenhouse on the outside, just to protect all of our market crops and all of those fresh starts, cuttings, everything alike. We have to keep them out of the direct sunlight. We've got a 30% shade cloth, so 70% of the light from the sun, when it's direct sunlight, no clouds, is coming through. So 70% sunlight is a lot better than 100% sunlight, because that can be very detrimental to any type of crop when it's in its early stages, or if you're trying to produce roots on a new cutting. We're trying to prevent any of these potted plants, and most of the plants on this side are in pots. We're trying to protect those potted plants. We have to treat them differently than plants that are in the ground. As you can see, I have all of these in flats. Now this is just an example. These are some cabbage or something, but we have all of these little flats, and these are very important because we can fill and bottom water. We don't always want to just come douse the tops, because I have some crops down there that we haven't had a whole lot of sunlight, and we're starting to get algal growth or algae growing on the top of them, and that's not always good because it can suck nutrients and it can be detrimental for crops at the same time. So keeping in mind that all of these potted plants need to be out of direct sunlight, because they will dry out in a matter of one day, because they do not have the earth to protect them. They don't have all of the moisture that they can draw from the ground and all of the ambient moisture that's always just underneath a surface. You can just pick up a rock, you can dig in the soil, you can move a potted plant, and there'll be a little bit of moisture underneath them as long as they're touching the ground. So we've always got a ton of water sources in here, and these are pretty important. We have a large 110-gallon tank, 120-gallon tank here, and our aquaponics running with that. Shooting down the greenhouse, we've got this large pond that we built here, and this is probably holding 250, maybe 300 gallons of water, and that is holding a massive thermal mass in this greenhouse. Although we do have some koi fish, my son's koi fish in there right now. I may feed them so they'll come up to the surface. We can check them out. So just by simply having water in the greenhouse, whether you're actually heating it or not, it is performing its duty of holding thermal mass. These fish are going wild here. So this is going to hold a ton of thermal mass, about 5 times as much as any sand or bricks or anything else we have in here. And having all this thermal mass is very important to keeping our greenhouse. You can hear all that wind and rain. So we've got maybe about 80 degrees or so, something like that. It's very hard to measure this. Whenever I measure it, it shows about 80 degrees or so. And that's pretty constant. Pretty much all winter long, we were able to pump about 60, 70, 80 degrees into this tank, depending on how warm our non-nitrogen filled compost pile was. We threw a bunch of nitrogen on there, inoculated it up at the end of winter here, and all of the water I've allowed the rain to put into our pile has built up a lot of thermal heat, and we're transferring it into this large 120 gallon tank of water. All of these water sources are very, very important to this greenhouse. You can just hear that ice hitting the greenhouse, man. It's not even snow anymore, it's just full-on ice hitting. So aside from using these as a thermal mass and heating the greenhouse in a sense with all of our water sources, we're always preparing for overheating. So you can see we've got 2 small shade cloths basically angled up on both sides of this pond. We've got plants underneath this shade cloth, but for the most part, we've only got a couple hours during the day where any sunlight will directly hit this pond. We do not want it to heat up too much. We want to keep it a constant temperature for the fish. So this one is not as much of a thermal accumulator as our other tanks are. Another main source of cooling your greenhouse is by using a fan. I'm smiling because I can barely hear myself talk. Hopefully everybody can hear me. That is wicked outside. So another main source of cooling your greenhouse is by ventilating. Now, all of these ponds keep the moisture up in here, and they keep the temps up also. The humidity in here is very important to all these crops and the survival. But we have to control the humidity, and we have to control those temperatures. We have a simple window actuator on both sides of this greenhouse, and they are just simple wax-filled cylinders that open up at 78 to 80 degrees, and they allow a ton of the trapped heat on those sunny days just on their own, opening up, allowing that heat to escape, and then as soon as the temperatures cool, they close back up and protect our greenhouse from getting too cold. So while we're always preparing ourselves and being prepared for overheating, we really have to keep this greenhouse warm enough still, because we've got tons of tomatoes, tons of peppers, and basil, and lots of warm season crops that just don't tolerate the cold. They will die back very quickly. So we've got to keep the greenhouse warm enough to have all of those crops survive. So with a combination of our wood stove and our geothermal, our compost heating, which I wanted to show the temps on the compost heating, our wood stove is going. It's definitely warm in here. Let me check the thermometer real quick. So this morning I came out here and set up the camera basically right away. Overnight we had 49 degrees. We're sitting about 53 in here right now. That wood stove has not even gotten the temperatures up because I just started it, just stuck that compost thermometer out there. So you guys are seeing this greenhouse right off the bat. I just walked in here and set the camera up. So I wanted to give a realistic view of how it is to grow in a cold climate, especially in the tricky times of spring. So the only thing I didn't mention was passive heating, because we haven't seen the sun in about a week and there is no passive temperatures coming in here. There's only enough sunlight coming through the clouds to run our simple solar systems on their timer. That compost heat is very important for keeping this greenhouse above 60, or pushing above 60 into the greenhouse through air and through water. Now, our geothermal tubing right over here next to me, you can see coming out of the ground here, that's pulsing. It is not 100% running right now because it's pretty darn gloomy outside, but that keeps the ground temperatures between 50 and 55 degrees. So those temps are going to allow those warm weather crops to survive. They're not going to grow very fast in those colder temperatures, but they're not dying, and that is very important for us in the springtime. Now, all of this stuff may seem very repetitive because we talk a lot about our compost heating, we talk tons about our geothermal, and using our wood stove. So I feel like it may be very repetitive, but it's very, very important because this is the cheapest way that this can be achieved. I mean, you could go spend $50,000 building some very, very sophisticated passive solar greenhouse that's going to grow in Antarctica. But that's a heck of an investment, and it would take us a long time to earn that money back or make it worth our while, because that is a ton of money and a ton of work, because we only spent about $1,500 on this 50-foot by 10-foot, 520 square foot greenhouse. We double layered it, and we are able to grow year-round in zone 5A, 4B here, which is almost unheard of. So keeping all of these plants alive, being able to have all of these crops where we had, if you look back this winter, we were able to harvest and eat out of this greenhouse through a polar vortex with -30, -40 degrees outside. So for any do-it-yourselfers, I would suggest starting small and getting your bearings on growing in a greenhouse, and then you can really find success. You can start selling your own plants, propagating, and making a decent profit for yourself through the warmer season or even through the winter. If you can achieve growing through the winter, you could probably sell some of those crops also. That ice is so loud out there. I apologize for that. I just wanted to come out and share what I've learned and what I've experienced growing in the greenhouse. It's always cool to come out here and watch the fish. They are a nice addition to this greenhouse. We're not fully finished. I'll be bringing an update on the pond once we finish that. We have figs on our fig tree here. Very, very cool to be seeing figs popping in the greenhouse. It is just awesome to be out here. It's kind of soothing to me to hear all that rain and ice. Nice working weather if you're dry inside a greenhouse, but man, is it wickedly raining and sleeting out there. That stuff is gnarly sounding. So I'm gonna continue working out here. I just wanted to come out here and talk about the trickiest times to grow and what we're doing to stave off those hot temperatures and keep our plants alive all night till we make it to our market season here and the temperatures actually warm up a bit. If anybody's got any questions, definitely drop those in the comments below. I just wanted to come out and share this with everybody because there's not a whole lot going on outside the greenhouse, so I'm stuck working in here today.